Very good morning, all of you. Warm welcome to this presentation by Mr. Naavi on data trust score under data protection compliance standards of India. I don't think Mr. Naavi needs an introduction as a presenter or a speaker. We all know. And thanks once again for joining on this Sunday. Let's all listen to Mr. Naavi, his thought process on the very expected and mandatory requirement of our upcoming law of India. Floor is yours, Mr. Naavi. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So good morning, friends. It has always been fascinating to interact with professionals, particularly on topics which are, you can say, on the mm, area of new developments in India. Data trust score, as well as, in fact, data protection law itself is something which is new to India, and we are actually trying to um, bring some insight into what the Indian law presents in the coming uh, days. Now, this concept of data trust score, okay, this terminology is also used by data scientists. But what we are going to discuss here is the legal concept of data trust score, because it is part of the Indian data protection law. Okay, so what we will discuss is something about this concept of data trust score, and then the reference framework, which we have called it as Data Protection Compliance Standard of India, DPCSI. Then we will go into some kind of a self-assessment possibility of an organization trying to ascertain what would be its data trust score if we are looking at compliance to the Indian data protection law. Then we will go further into the possibility of a summary assessment of data trust score of an organization by an auditor. And finally, if an organization wants to go further, they can actually get their compliance system audited and the DTS score certified by the FDPPI. FDPPI, as you know, is the Foundation of Data Protection Professionals in India, a Section 8 company dedicated to data protection in India, started in 2018, run by professionals. It is a not-for-profit organization basically created by the data protection professionals so that we will empower the data protection professionals in India with the knowledge and skills, with certifications, and we have gone a step further in actually creating a specific data protection compliance framework also. So during this next 1 hour or a little over that with discussions, we will look at the data trust score to some extent, the DPCSI, then also understand bits of law as it reflects on data protection compliance in a data processing organization. Now, to look at the definition of data trust score, I told you that there is similar terminology used by data scientists, but section 29(5), subsection 5 of the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019, which we today try to refer as DPA 2021. Okay, maybe when it is passed, it may become DPA 2022, but let us understand that we are talking of that bill which has been produced in the Indian Parliament for passing. It has already been vetted by a joint parliamentary committee of parliamentarians from both the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and the version which we are now looking at as DPA 2021 is the JPC modified version. So from this, whether further modifications can happen, it is possible technically, we will have to wait and see. In this particular bill, section 29 subsection 5 says a data auditor may assign a rating in the form of a data trust score to the data fiduciary pursuant to a data audit conducted under this section. The section 29 talks about data audit, which is mandatory on an annual basis to be conducted by an external data auditor for significant data fiduciaries. Now, if somebody says, I am not a significant data fiduciary, it may become optional, but for others, this annual mandatory data audit is to be conducted by an external data auditor. Additionally, JPC has recommended that there should be a concept of concurrent audit. So therefore, every organization which is processing personal data in India will be subject to the possibility of a data audit by external data auditor, and the direction under section 29 is to that data auditor that he may assign a data trust score to indicate how good is the compliance about the organization in terms of whatever the law has prescribed. Additionally, there is a section 7 which talks about the requirements of a notice for consent. We know that personal data is always collected on the basis of a consent, and before a consent is obtained, there has to be a notice which is like a request for consent, and that has to contain certain mandatory requirements, like what is the purpose for which the data is being collected, what is the data which is being collected, how long it will be retained, etc., etc. Now, that notice contain also a mention of the data trust score. That is what the Indian law says, which means that the data trust score is not meant to be only hidden behind a conversation between the data auditor and the data fiduciary, but it is meant to be exposed to the outside world, which is the data principles. Now, the Indian law has a unique way of looking at these data principles, like we look at investors in an investment scenario. Now, suppose I and you have to invest in a company in an IPO, we expect the company to give a prospectus, and if it is a debt instrument, we expect that there is a debt instrument rating either by CRISIL, ICRA, etc. And based on that, the investor takes a decision whether I should invest in this company or not. A similar concept is there in the Indian law, and any organization, a data fiduciary, which wants to raise personal data from the public, has to issue a document called Privacy by Design policy, get it certified by the Data Protection Authority, the same way a prospectus is vetted by SEBI. And this data trust score becomes an element of how the auditor has perceived the data protection compliance in the organization. Of course, when we talk of annual audit, the first data trust score will actually become available perhaps after the next financial year. But if you look at concurrent audit, the organization will start looking at a concurrent audit of its data compliance system on an ongoing basis with the designated external data auditor, which means that a significant data auditor has to choose its annual data auditor. Just as today they choose a statutory auditor for financial accounts, they have to choose a, this is also, you can say, statutory data auditor. They have to choose the statutory data auditor 1 year in advance if they want to get into concurrent audit, and then ask that auditor to keep on looking at how the compliance is evolving in the organization, so that at the end of the year, it can be converted into this annual audit, a copy of which will have to be submitted to the Data Protection Authority, like you submit your annual financial audit to SEBI through published, let us say, the financial statements which are given to SEBI as well as to the stock exchanges. So the system of data audit regulation in India closely follows the system of financial control. So personal data is more or less considered as the currency which the data principal will invest in a data fiduciary. And we know that data fiduciary will make money out of it. Okay. But the data fiduciary has to take my consent. Now, while giving that consent, he is giving in return a kind of a service, which means there is a consideration which is being passed on in terms of some kind of a service. So that is the system which we are having in India. And therefore, this data trust score is indicated as something which the data auditor will assign, and it will be made available to the investors in due course. Now, people may ask me, is referring to PDPB 2019 relevant at all, because it has not yet been enacted, it is only a bill? Definitely this question is a valid question. Also because there has been a considerable delay in the passing of this bill, and very frequently we see press reports saying that the government is considering scrapping this bill, bringing a new version and so on. So the industry is little confused as to should we follow PDPB 2019 or not. Now here we need to understand that India has a law called Information Technology Act, which was passed first in 2000 and then subsequently amended substantially in the year 2008. The amendments were brought into force in 2009, and certain key notifications were made on 11th April 2011, one of which was the notification regarding the rules regarding reasonable security practices to be followed under section 43 capital A, as well as due diligence under section 79. Now, this concept of due diligence, which is embedded into Information Technology Act, includes the best practices of the industry and also the legislative intent. See, due diligence is not restricted to what is there in section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of a law. Okay. This is something which goes beyond the statutory prescriptions, and legislative intention is also considered as due diligence. In fact, there have been at least 3 High Court decisions, one in Odisha, one in Delhi, and one in Madras, where references in the judgment have been done to certain sections of the PDPB 2019. Now, if PDPB 2019 is only a bill, not a law, where was the necessity for the judiciary to make a reference to the clause in the bill? That is because the concept of due diligence extends to best practices. It extends to this legislative intent as provided in this bill. That is why GDPR is referred to in certain cases. In these 3 cases, PDPB is also referred to. That is why we say that Information Technology Act is today applicable until this is completely replaced by another law. It is applicable. 43 capital A is applicable. It will be only replaced after the Data Protection Act comes into being. And if 43 capital A is applicable, then the concept of due diligence and reasonable security practices are the law of the day. And if the interpretation is that legislative intent of India as expressed in the bill which has been presented in the parliament, had a public scrutiny, had a JPC scrutiny, that version of the bill should be considered as part of the due diligence. Therefore, we say that it is preferable for organizations which are forward-looking to consider that PDPB as it stands as a bill today in the DPA 2021 form must be considered as something which we should start implementing in our organization. See, when this act is passed, the government may give us another 1 year time or even 2 years time as GDPR had given, but we know from our experience in GDPR that implementation of an enterprise level data protection compliance is not an overnight activity. It takes time. Now, many organizations require 6 months, 1 year, or even 2 years. So it is better if an organization starts looking at compliance much earlier than waiting for a time when law forces them to do so. Now, the people who question PDPB being considered as applicable today also question that Section 29 says data auditor may assign. It does not say shall assign. And Section 7 states that the data trust score will be included in the notice. See, when I say notice, remember this notice is equivalent to the privacy policy, which is ubiquitous in every website. Now, all these privacy policies on the websites will have to have a DTS as far as that organization is concerned. That is the understanding. But here also, Section 7 says where applicable, which means that as of now, the government is not forcing the DTS on the organizations, because they know that many organizations will be reluctant to expose to the public how good is their data protection policies. We know that most of them don't have a proper data protection system. They are striving to achieve a certain standard, particularly because a GDPR client has asked them to do, and there are many auditors or consultants who may give a certificate that an organization is compliant. We do not know most of the time whether it is actually good in implementation, but there is a level of understanding in major companies that some level of data protection compliance is required. And the question is whether we should reveal it to the outside world or not. So there will be reluctance, and people will be looking behind this word may and where applicable to say that DTS is there in the law, but it is not necessary. So I look at organizations and say that you have the option. One is you may leave it to the discretion of the auditor when he comes for your data audit to assign a rating. Or if you are very particular, you may request the auditor, please don't assign a rating. But if normally you cannot direct an auditor to do something, he may choose to assign a rating and advise it to you. And then you have the option that you may not disclose it. You may take it, but you may not disclose it. But most forward-looking organizations who are privacy champions and who wants to be leaders in their service domain would like to obtain the rating and even disclose it. What is that is going to happen if the DTS is good? Obviously, it is a proud moment for them. If the DTS is less than desirable, then it is an indication of where they have to improve. So bold managements who are interested in a faithful disclosure and transparency of their data protection requirements, implementation, will choose to provide DTS either on their websites or in the PBD policy, that is the privacy by design policy, and maybe even on the notices. Now, organizations who adopt that will be considered as more data principle oriented than people who are not that, you can say, who are hiding the result. In fact, in the credit rating organizations today, if my organization has got a credit rating and I don't want to disclose it, it obviously means that I am not happy with that rating, or I am not confident that if I announce that rating to the public, then my existing fixed deposits or debentures may not get the subscriptions. So it is automatically an indication of inferiority in the marketplace. Therefore, I feel that some auditors will say that I will give you the DTS and leave it to you to decide whether you should make it available to the market or not. and most of the organizations may decide to make it available. Remember that in this particular law, that is data protection law in India, has got a concept of consent managers. So as we go ahead, data principals are unlikely to come directly to the data fiduciary and provide you their personal data. They will force you to actually make use of the services of a consent manager who will be the trustee for personal data for the data principals. They are actually data fiduciaries themselves, but a special category of data fiduciaries who will be registered with the Data Protection Authority with their own privacy by design policy, which should be approved by the Data Protection Authority. Now, these consent managers will be providing consent on behalf of the data principals to the user data fiduciaries. This consent manager is different from the consent manager which Reserve Bank of India uses in account aggregation system and other things. See that there the consent manager is a technology company like an ISP which does not have visibility to the personal data. But the consent manager as envisaged under DPA 2021 will have full visibility to the personal data. It will take the personal data from the data principal, securely store it with them, maybe like a digital locker or whatever is that, then releases it to the data fiduciary based on the purpose and requirement. Therefore, the data fiduciaries will be no longer be capable of hoodwinking the data principal with a long list of consent document, making it difficult for the data principal to understand why the data is collected, how it is used, etc. Now the consent manager, who is a professional organization, will be vetting the privacy policies of every organization. They will be giving their own rating and then tell their customers who are data principals, if you have got a choice of two service providers providing the same kind of service, go to this particular service provider who has got a better data protection than the other. In this context, the consent managers will be forcing the companies to give out their DTS. It is like an institutional investor in a debt instrument who will be forcing a company to reveal the credit rating of the company or the instrument, though it is not mandatorily made available to other common investors. So the consent managers will be similar to this institutional investors in the financial segment. They will wield certain extra powers to demand the DTS. And therefore, as we go along, it will be necessary for organizations to accept DTS as a necessity, and not disclosing it will be perceived as a weakness as far as the company is concerned. It may take some time to attain that level of maturity for the investors or the data principals, but that is the direction in which the things will move. Therefore, this data trust score is going to be the future. And even if PDPP 2019 is likely to be delayed, not passed during this monsoon session, even if some auditors do not adopt to DTS system for whatever reasons of their own, even if some organizations choose not to disclose it, DTS as a system which measures the data protection compliance is here to stay, and consent managers will definitely force the industry to adapt to this new norm, and data protection authority itself in due course may start pushing for DTS initially for processors of critical personal data. Then they may make it to significant of the significant data fiduciaries by choice, and then they may extend it to all significant data fiduciaries because DTS is a good system which brings transparency to the data protection capability of an organization. Now, this introduction is essential because as professionals, you all first of all need to accept the concept of DTS, then understanding what is the DTS becomes a child's play. Now, to make any assessment like the DTS, there has to be a frame of reference. Therefore, we have adopted a frame of reference called DPCSI, which is Data Protection Compliance Standard of India, as the frame of reference against which the data trust score is being evaluated during a data audit. Now, this DPCSI is a framework, just as you have got ISO 27001 as a framework for implementation of ISMS. You have got ISO 27701 as a framework for implementation of PIMS. DPCSI is a framework for implementation of DPCMS, which is the Data Protection Compliance Management System. Now you can ask me, why are we introducing a concept called data protection compliance management of system, while we already have ISMS, PIMS, or whatever it is. Now, this DPA 2021 has one section called Section 50, which provides codes of practice. And it says the code of practice designed by an industry can be approved by the Data Protection Authority, and then that becomes the standard. You don't have to take any existing standard. You can actually create new standards. Now, DPCMS is one such code of practice which we have developed for the industry. And within this, we are trying to develop sectoral versions of DPCMS, because we know that data protection compliance for organization A is not the same for organization B, same for organization C, particularly if the law is made for the largest of the organizations, the smallest of the organization, which also has to take compliance, will not find it convenient. A cooperative bank will not be convenient to have the same frame of reference as a State Bank of India or an ICICI Bank. Therefore, there is a need to look at segment-wise some kind of modifications, and we are trying to do that as part of our FDPPI's activity. So DPCMS looks at this code of practice and develops this frame of reference based on which the DTS is calculated. Now, the reason why we have tried to look at DPCMS, that is Data Protection Compliance Management System, versus a more raw status of, let us say, PIMS, which is the Personal Information Management System, or even broader ISMS. Say ISMS is supposed to secure all data, personal data, non-personal data. PIMS is an extension of ISMS to add the privacy aspects. But we have chosen to call this as DPCMS. The reason is that the objective of DPCMS, or whatever we are today calling as privacy, compliance, data privacy, etc., is to protect the privacy. Privacy is a right of a citizen guaranteed by Constitution. But the exact definition of privacy is still an enigma. Nobody knows exactly what are the contours or the limits of this definition of privacy. Even the Puttaswamy bench of Supreme Court, which had 9 Supreme Court judges, did not define what is privacy. They only described that it is a state of mind. That too only in the descriptive part of the order, not in the final order. Now, when you say privacy is a right related to the state of mind of an individual, and somebody is expected to protect that privacy, the protector of this privacy should know what is the state of mind of an individual. And the individual, one individual is not the same as the other individual, and the same individual is not the same today and tomorrow. So the state of mind is something which is dynamic, impossible for an outsider like a data fiduciary to really understand and protect it. That is why privacy protection has been reduced to the concept of protecting the choice of an individual regarding how his or her personal information may be collected and processed by an organization. That is, we leave it to the data principal to say, please let me know how I am supposed to use your data. I will try to do that. Now, tomorrow, if you change your mind, then it is your responsibility to tell me tomorrow that I have changed my mind. Until that time, the consent which you have given yesterday becomes relevant. So I will take the consent. I will give you the right to withdraw the consent. Between the time, I have something based on which I can devise my processing systems and I can use your personal data. This is what is the reduction of the understanding of privacy from state of mind to the right of choice. Now, in terms of a data processing organization, while we collect privacy choices through consent, ultimately there is an interpretation because this choice is based on what are the minimum things which are required for compliance. And then say if data minimization is there, retention of data is allowed for say 5 years, 2 years, something like that. There are certain things which are stated in the law, which becomes the ground for my devising the privacy by design policy. Therefore, instead of simply saying that I will protect your right of choice, we are going to say that we will look at what the law says and we will comply with the law. We hope that the law has been created by the lawmakers in such a manner that your privacy rights will get protected. That is, I am not going to stand in the position of a judge who says the privacy of Mr. A has been protected by company B. I will ask company B, have you been compliant with the data protection laws of your country? If you can show me enough evidence, I am happy and I will tell this data principle, this is all what we can do. That is why compliance is considered as an essential feature of compliance, of protecting the privacy. And just as ISMS is a system for information security management system, PIMS is for the management system for GDPR compliance. We are looking at DPCMS as the system which will enable compliance of data protection law. And by doing this, we are more honest than anybody else in the sense that we are saying that I am not able to understand your state of mind, dear data principal. So don't expect me to protect your state of mind. I am only trying to protect your privacy information through whatever compliance laws are made in this country, and within my jurisdiction, I am exposing myself to that law. So this is what FDP has considered as a necessity, that instead of saying that I will protect the privacy of Indian citizens, or I will protect the right of choice based on the consent. Tomorrow the question will be whether the consent has been properly obtained. In India, we consider the data controller as the data fiduciary. Data fiduciary has a responsibility to anticipate the requirement of the data principle and then apply the law. He cannot go just by the wordings used in the consent form and say I am compliant. So therefore, the organizations will not be able to 100% say that they are compliant with even the consent form. Therefore, we are trying to say that what is more realistic is for an organization to be open and say, we will comply with the law. It is for law to comply with the privacy requirements. And if there is a dispute, we will discuss it in the court of law. So with this idea, we have constructed this data protection compliance standard of India, which actually contains 12 standards and 50 implementation specifications. This is the framework on which DTS is being calculated. That is why we need to understand what is this framework. Now, these 50 model implementation specifications is actually divided into 5 responsibility centers: management, DPO, legal, HR, IT. So if management and DPO are at the top level, because you know in India DPO is a person at the KMP level. KMP level means almost he is part of the board. So the top management will take certain responsibilities. Middle management like legal and HR will take some responsibilities, and IT department, which is today taking responsibility for security, will handle some of the model implementation specifications. Now the standards are broad contours of compliance. We will not go into the details, but I just want you to understand that the standards cover law specific scoping, because each data set is actually related to a particular law. Indian data is related to Indian law, EU data is related to GDPR law. So scoping will have to be law specific. Top level governance, it will be required. Risk appetite based implementation charter is part of the standard. Privacy by design is looked at the entity level, not at the IT level. There is a data classification system which is significantly different from others. And then there is an emphasis on communication. There is a unique distributed responsibility of the compliance requirements, along with the development of the workforce culture. These two are to some extent people-oriented requirements. The regular technical controls are there, policy controls are there. Additionally, we say that the system should be amenable for certification by an independent auditor. So you must be able to be transparent about your algorithms and other things. The law itself says an algorithm has to be certified for what it does to the private, personal information. So that kind of transparency for the entire organizational, say, processes will be essential for compliance. So it has to be amenable for proper certification, and there has to be a measurability enablement, which is where we are trying to bring in DTS. We are also trying to bring in the measurability in terms of the value of the data, because we adopt a data valuation standard also. Now, standards are an umbrella requirements, but what is more relevant for an implementing person is the model implementation specifications, which are 50 in number, which are divided into 5 categories. Management specific, some 15 responsibilities are there, which includes the DPO designation, having the risk mitigation charter, then whistleblower concept, data audits, something of this nature. Then we come to the data protection officer. Designated data protection officer has got some responsibilities of his own, which includes development of the policies, notice, profiling, and conducting DPIA and so on. So between this first 15 and the next 24 responsibilities, most of the requirements at the top level are covered as far as data protection is concerned. But we expect that legal department will be involved in contract control and grievance redressal management. Then HR will be involved in separate implementation specifications. We feel that employee privacy management will have to be treated separately from the outsider privacy management. Then HR policy will have to be augmented with incentivization and sanctions. And in the distributed responsibility concept, the asset responsibility will have to be revisited. Work from home is also something which needs to be looked at from the data protection concept. So HR has got certain responsibilities. Then we come to the technology department, which is currently the repository of all data protection responsibilities. But here we have tried to bring all that responsibilities within about 20 implementation specifications, starting with the record of processing, then data leak prevention, DRP, including system patching, malware control, processing security, transmission security, and so on. Even the physical security, to some extent, is the responsibility has to be brought into the team. So whether in an organization it is done by the IT manager or by a separate person is different, but we are keeping that as part of the, you can say, legacy system, which is trying to address all these things. So this 50 model implementation specifications, there will be different responsibility heads. Now, this implementation charter is a concept which is similar to your SOA concept in ISO, that is the statement of applicability. Basically, we are trying to say that the top management will take full responsibility for anything which is being implemented in the organization, tomorrow you are not going to hold the DPO responsible for everything. People have been asking us whether DPO will have to go to jail, whether law will catch him up, because there is at least one section in the information technology, in this particular act, data protection law, which says that re-identification of a de-identified information is a punishable offense for which there is 3 years imprisonment and so on. So while the penalties are there on the organization, whether it is 2% or 4% of the turnover, what a DPO is more concerned is whether he is personally getting into some kind of a liability, either as a breach of trust category liability, or this uh, re-identification of the de-identification, which is a risk in all data science companies and big data companies. Okay, now in order to protect this data protection officer as an individual, there is a need to bring the organization as a whole to accept a certain charter, and DPO will be able to say that this is whatever we are trying to do is the responsibility of the organization. So that is why we give a lot of importance to this implementation charter, which will be drawn on the basis of the risk absorption capacity of the organization, and because of which the 50 model implementation specifications can be to some extent simplified into an adopted implementation specifications, but it will require a deviation justification document to be signed by the top management. So the DPO in terms of implementation will look at the MIS, that is a model implementation specification which the DPCS seems to suggest, but the management has taken the responsibility to absorb certain risks within itself. So what is the residual risk to be mitigated is what the DPO is responsible for. If some organization wants to adopt cyber insurance and further mitigate the risk, the DPO's responsibility to that extent will be modified. So this is the importance of the implementation charter which we are trying to give, which is derived from the model implementation specifications along with the deviation justification document. Now, when we come to the computation of DTS, remember this is the first time in India and perhaps elsewhere that we are trying to provide a numeric value to the compliance status. Now, normally the law says that the consent of the notice should be in simple language, understandable by the data principle and so on. Now, if there are two privacy policies or the notices, now which is more simple than the other is a subjective aspect, which is more complete than the other is also a subjective matter. Therefore, bringing it down to a numerical value is a challenge, but it has to be done because in this digital world, everything is reduced to zeros and ones. Even a picture is reduced to zeros and ones. Why not we reduce a subjective evaluation into some figure? So DTS is one such measure. What we try to do is to compute this on the basis of this 50 model implementation specification by assigning a value to the effectiveness of the implementation of each MIS on a scale of 1 to 10 and then aggregating, which means that there are 500 points and it is being aggregated. So, and this is done for different responsibility centers. We have a system of assigning some kind of a weightage to what is the management responsibilities, what is the IT responsibilities and so on. So we adjust the aggregated DTS evaluations over 50 MIS by applying a certain proprietary, you can say the weightages. This weightages we intend to keep it dynamic in the sense that it may vary from organization to organization. The weightages we may give to different levels of the different management centers in a startup company and an established company could be different. So for the time being, we are keeping that as a proprietary element. And then when FDPPI backed DTS comes out, you can be assured that we have taken into account some of these things. I am not saying that the system will be perfect from day one. We are actually trying towards achieving a more acceptable standard of evaluation of compliance. And from a zero base, definitely it is a significant quantum jump. But there will be need for further refinements, which we will be continuing to do. And that is how this system is going to be improved. And in evaluating and putting some number, there is a need for the system, which may be the auditor or the self-assessment system, to make a risk assessment on various processes and activities of the organization. And while making the risk assessment, there has to be a significance ranking assigned, because our law talks of significance of harm. So we have to look at the harm caused to the data principle, what is the significance of the harm, and that has to be brought into the risk assessment. And then you have to also assign, of course, the probability to understand the risk fructification. And with all those things, you come to evaluation between 1 to 10, whether a particular MIS you should give 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. That depends upon this risk assessment. Now, having done that, you come up with the aggregate DTS and then apply the weightages and then go ahead. Now, just to give you the confidence that what we have done in the DPCSI meets the code of practice as given under section 50, we have created our own mapping of the requirements of 19 points which are stated in the code of practice, and see how each of these things are addressed by our different implementation specification. Here IS stands for implementation specification. So if you say notice, then we have got several implementation specifications addressing it. If you say data retention, we have got certain things. Then there is other reasonable purposes for consent exemption. There are certain implementation specifications. So each of these code of practice elements, from 1 to 6 given here, 7 to 12 given here, regarding sensitive personal information, data portability, transparency, and the security, standard of security, all these things, then methods of de-identification, methods of destruction, data breach notification. So 19 points are there in this section 50 of this particular law. And all of them are adequately covered in multiple implementation specifications. And since there is one more last line which says any other matter which in the view of the authority may become necessary, because this code of practice has to be given by the Data Protection Authority in due course, we have already added 19 different additional factors in the DPCSI, so that it does not confine itself only to this 19 codes of practice. It transcends that into more areas. Some of the things which need specific mention is data valuation and distributed responsibility. We feel that it is always essential for the management to know what is the value of the asset they are trying to protect. If you keep it, unclear, the CFO will not be able to put funds for that. CEO will not be able to understand what quality of data protection officer he has to recruit and so on. So we feel that valuing the data under the custody of an organization and making it visible to the top management is one of the essential aspects. We have also tried to develop a data valuation standard of India separately, so that some system is developed for how to value a data set A versus data set B, and taking into account the quality, the depth, etc. There is also a concept called distributed responsibility, which will also be very novel. And under this distributed responsibility, the responsibility for data protection is getting distributed across the organization, where DPO will remain accountable to the outside world, but within the organization, we will have internal data controllers who will be taking some additional responsibilities based on how close they are to a process. A process manager is the best person to understand what is happening within the process, and a DPO sitting in another city is unlikely to have enough visibility to the activity of the company. So we have brought this into our system and say there has to be a distributed responsibility. Now, the first 19 are more or less mandatory. The remaining things are suggested and it is considered as the best practice under DPCSI. Between these two, we are covering all the best practices of other known frameworks like your 27701 or anything else. Now we come to the last part where what is the way by which organizations can adopt this DTS. See, there is no point in just sermonizing that we need to have DTS and so on. There has to be something which an organization, particularly MSMEs who may not have access to the top level DPOs, to actually implement it. Therefore, what we have done through one of our members, which Ujjwala Consultants, is we have developed a tool which may be called by different names. So you may call it as My DTS tool. It may be called as a FDPPA DTS tool, or you may call it as Naavi DTS or whatever is that. Now, this will be a web-based assessment tool. An organization can access this and do a self-assessment. And after they do a self-assessment on the web, they can submit it to the auditor. The auditor will give a cursory glance on the submission and give a brief review comment. Now, subsequently, if the organization wants a more reliable assessment, they can submit the documents which give evidence to various policies and other things. And based on the evaluation of the documents, the auditor will provide a summary assessment, which is better than the self-assessment. And then we come to the last stage where the auditor may be invited for a more detailed audit evaluation, which will be certified by FDPPI under its own system. So we have designed a particular system for self-assessment, summary assessment, and a certified assessment. For certification, FDPPI has got its own systems. They have already appointed or designated a few people as accreditation bodies. They have already trained at least about 50 persons in data protection capabilities who are good enough to be DPOs in organizations. They are also good enough to be consultants to the organization for implementation and also to conduct audits. We make a small distinction between consultants and auditors, and that is for some other day. Now, so this MyDTS system will work by your going directly to the ujjwala.com website. There will be a link on MyDTS. Presently, as a very, very limited period offer, we have put a small price for this self-evaluation, because at the end of self-evaluation, you will be having a checklist of what requires to be done. See, two things which we as consultants normally get from people in this compliance implementation is, can you give me a checklist of compliance? Can you give me templates of various compliance documents? So here we are trying to at least give a checklist. Now, templates is something which I normally don't recommend to be generalized, because templates of a particular policy, for example, DPIA, can there be a template for DPIA? It can be there only at a very broad level, because it may differ from one process to another process. So templates is left to the consultants to generate based on the type of say organization. So we are not doing that, but by going through the self-assessment, an organization will be having a reasonably good checklist of what they need to do. If they just have those policies by name and whatever content suggestions are given, I think they will be reasonably in a better position to implement. Now, whether the consent form they have designed is good enough or not is for further evaluation. That will be done through summary assessment. So we expect that this whole questionnaire will be is actually in 5 parts, and 5 different people, each responsibility center head will fill up these things, and then it will be submitted. On receipt, the recipient auditor, what he will do is he will apply the weightages, because weightages is under his own control. So he will apply the weightages, then just see whether there are major, you can say, gaps. And give his review statement, which will be more or like a gap assessment. So this gap assessment of data protection, if it can be completed by a self-assessment basis, that is the first level of compliance. And that is why we are trying to say that this MyDTS system which we are introducing, it is likely to create a compliance culture across India. We want hundreds of companies to make use of this, make a self-assessment, have their own checklist, and let us not worry today about further cost of inviting a consultant who will vet their documents and give a summary assessment, or do an audit. They are all expensive propositions perhaps for most of the companies. So without going into that second and third level, at the first level itself, a large number of organizations can do a self-assessment, and that will create a compliance culture even before the government brings in the law. That is the objective of this particular exercise. There are totally about 233 questions in this questionnaire. It may increase at the back end. We may try to add more questions as and when it is necessary. The total self-assessed score on 50 different implementation specification is 500. On submission, we will create an adjustment with weightages and other things and give it DTS score, which will be between 1 to 100. Okay, so this is what is going to happen in this. Now, I will take some questions, but before that, a couple of slides on, as professionals, what more you can do. Next steps. One is that you can be personally certified for better knowledge and skills on data protection. And FDPPI is providing a 3-module certification, one on Indian laws, one on global laws, and one on audit requirements. Totally about 40 hours of recorded videos are there, which will be made available. Then there will be mentoring sessions at the end of each of these modules, which some of our people, including me, will be handling it, so that whatever they don't perhaps follow in the video can be discussed. And that will be the training module. End of each module, there could be tests. There are totally 3 online tests of 90 minutes each, one for each module, which can be taken. And participation certificate would be provided to all attendees. Whereas if they come successful in the examination, they may get a certificate as certified data protection compliance consultant or a compliance auditor. We have kept a cutoff for auditors at a higher level. So based on the cutoff, we will make a person either a consultant or an auditor. Consultant will help the organizations in implementing. Auditor will be actually conducting the assessment. And there will be also certification bodies. Some of the organizations which you represent can become certification bodies. We expect certification bodies to be the business entities which will try to market the audit, but it will be executed by at least one lead auditor who is a certified data auditor. Now, organizations, they can use certified consultants for their DPOs, or they may use them as consultants, but audit has to be done by a different person who is unattached with the particular company, at least for a period of last 2 years. Some norms are there. So this is what I wanted to share with all of you as far as the system is concerned. And if any questions are there, I would like to do it. Mr. You can please put it in the chat if you are not able to unmute yourself. And Ramesh will perhaps help me
Yeah, yeah.
on the questions.
Great, great. There is one question already from Mr. Atul.
Yeah.
He's asking, sir, can we have a training on the self-assessment checklist and guidance on how to use after purchasing the same?
Certainly, certainly. We have that module. You can get in touch with him. In fact, recently I conducted a 2-day program for one corporate in Bombay, which covered not only the Indian laws, which is of course not well known, and this audit modules. We left out the GDPR module because that was something which they already knew. That is, of course, our global module does not restrict to GDPR only. It also addresses CCPA, Singapore law, and other laws. So it's actually at least 4 or 5 from each continent. We try to have at least one data protection law. But we can conduct this kind of in-house training exclusively for companies. You may contact us for that, Ashish.
Right.
Yeah.
Another question from Mr. Vijay Srinivas.
Yeah.
His question is, sir, will it be something like a DPR checklist review as per the Microsoft SSPA compliance?
Uh, Ramesh, can you just let me know more about what norms are used by Microsoft?
Correct, correct, correct. Mr. Vijay Srinivas, will you be able to unmute and then,
Hi,
yeah,
sir.
go ahead.
Good morning,
Go
sir.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is basically the data protection review. What Microsoft has made it mandatory is any vendor, they have to get complied under SSPA, and there is a 54-point checklist which they have to comply with,
Okay.
including
Okay,
data.
I understand. But I've gone through that once at least earlier. But what we are having as a checklist is oriented towards the compliance of Indian law. So it will include whatever might have been there in the SSPA compliance, which will be mostly on the CIA concept of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We are going much broader. You can say it may look similar, but it is still different.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Sir, the next question is from
Vikram.
Vikram.
Yeah. Now,
Is
I understand that. I see that question here.
Sure.
And the law says that the Data Protection Authority will specify how the DTS may be computed. Agreed. We have to wait for the DPA to come up with that. But from the inference, DTS has to be something to make an assessment of how well the data compliance has been achieved. So we have created our own model shadow system, you can say. In fact, FDPPI is trying to build a shadow system on everything. Now, if you go through the data protection law, some 50 documents are expected from the from DPA once the act is passed. Now, we are ready with most of that documents as recommended practices under DPCSI, and therefore we will meet what is required by the DPA. But ultimate power is with the DPA to define what will be the general constitution of how to arrive at the DTS. It may come, but I think we are almost covering what the DPA itself is supposed to do. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Next.
So there is one question from Megavanan. For India DPA auditor, why we need to go through all the 3 modules to get certified auditor?
Okay. Okay. Now, remember, if you want to make an assessment of evidence, which is a consent form or DPIA, if you do not know the law, then I think it is not only a technical issue. It is a techno-legal issue. Without knowing the law, you cannot make a DPIA, you cannot make a data breach notification, you will not know what is the harm, what is the significance of the harm, and therefore it is required to know the law. That's why modules are created. Now, why we are discussing global laws in addition to Indian laws is that every organization in India has a mix of data. That is, you will be having EU data, you will also be having Indian data. Indian data is more prominent because you are in this jurisdiction. The EU data is also there. So some knowledge of how GDPR addresses this, how Singapore addresses this, will always make it for a better DPO. Say, for example, this act says that DPO has to be a KMP level person, which means that he is already in the board level. Now, what skills he should have, what knowledge he should have, maybe Data Protection Authority will give a list. But they may also generally describe that he should be conversant with the data protection laws of India and other places, because many times when we do interpretations, we do take some kind of an idea from what a supervisory authority might have done in GDPR and so on. So therefore, knowledge of laws is essential. Some knowledge of technology is also essential. And of course, how we conduct the audits, we are trying to bring all the three together. I personally feel that you will be a better DPO if and a better data auditor, because when you are doing a data audit, you are actually submitting your audit to the Data Protection Authority. So therefore, you need to be conversant with the law properly. So therefore, I feel it is necessary, and we have tried to give that as a part of the whole package. Yeah.
Right. Question from one Mr. Syed. Is there any government approved body for certification?
Right now it is not there. FDPPI is a voluntary organization which we will try to get the acceptance of the DPA when it comes. In fact, worldwide, there is no organization which has been accredited to such an extent that if you take a certification from X organization, you will be considered or deemed to be compliant and no liability will come. Every time liability is fixed based on the assessment made by the Data Protection Authority on the particular context. So what all consultants and auditors will do is to help the management to mitigate the risk of non-compliance. Okay.
Question from Mr. Krishna.
Yeah.
Dear sir, is the tool a software-based module or Excel-based? How the enhancements to the tool are updated to the end user?
No, so you have to come to the website and take the tool. So it is hosted on the website as of now. It is not handed over, but if possible, tomorrow we can try to change the modality in which the questions can be served.
Right.
Okay.
Great. Question from Reena sir.
Yeah.
Can the DTS assessment be used to derive the compliance index for other laws with relevant tweaking to the questionnaire?
No, for the GDPR and other things, you can use it. See,
Yes.
that is where the templates will be different. Say, a consent form is required whether it is for GDPR or for Indian law. But template for Indian law will contain the 14 points which are there in section 7 of Indian PDPB, whereas the consent form for GDPR may be different. So the questionnaire can be used at the time of summary assessment. The auditor will apply the relevant law. That is why at the topmost this thing, one of the standards is we are saying that it is a law specific scoping will have to be done. So if you say that you have got one data center which is processing only EU data, then we have to apply GDPR to that, not the Indian law. And we expect that the company will get the exemption properly. You know that Indian law gives an exemption for a data center which is exclusively handling a different country's citizens' data under a different law. So if you are having a GDPR requirement, you segregate it into a separate data center, only GDPR will be applied. Most of the time companies try to mix up and they have one data center in which all data is there, then you will get into some kind of a complications. But to answer your question, yes, it can be used for other data.
Right.
Only at the template level we will make the changes. Yeah.
Right. Question from Mr. Anirban.
Mm.
First of all, this is a great tool and an initiative. My question is that if any MNC already have a DTS at a group level, which includes all the entities across the globe, then will this PDP 2021 ask for a specific DTS for India-based entities separately, or the group level DTS will be accepted by the government of India?
See, right now DTS is indicated in the Indian law. Okay. So if the Indian law says that if you are located in India, for example, an MNC which is registered in India, they are required to be compliant with the Indian law, even if they have got a branch abroad and processing foreigners' data abroad. But the law says that in such cases, you can claim exemption by a notification. So if you don't get that exemption, then your DTS will have to be on a global basis. If you claim exemption, then it is possible for us to segregate what is not applicable under Indian law and compute the DTS only for the Indian data.
Right. Question from Meghavannan. Any discount for the training as well as to the exam?
Any discount?
Discount for the training as well as for the exam.
No, definitely it will be considered at the appropriate when the request
Right.
is received. Okay.
And,
Yeah.
and he also put one question, same Mr. Meghavannan, that how is it different from the auditor course of DSCI? DSCI.
Now you are, say, at present, I'm not sure if anybody has been focusing on the PDPP. Okay, everybody is talking about GDPR compliance. So anyway, you can go through that once again. I will also go through that, but
Yes.
definitely this will be different. What FDPPA is offering is, I can confidently say it is unique, but it is for you, the users, to actually feel that it is unique. That will take time. You have to experience what is there. You have to discuss with me. Then perhaps we will come to that answer. Okay.
If I can share my experience as I had gone through all the 3 modules of FDPPI, sir, I would like to take this
Yeah,
question on
yeah.
your behalf. So Mr. Meghavannan, question is a valid question, but I can assure you that I had gone through starting with module I, module G, module audit, module A, what we call. Obviously, in my experience, because I had also gone through DSCI framework way back in 2018, if I'm right, I had gone through that training. So I can confidently say the FDPPA training is unique from different perspective, because what Mr. Naavi talked about, the DPCSI framework itself is unique. I don't think any other, private initiative had come out with this kind of code of ethics, what we call, or the standards. Okay. So the 12 implementation specification and that 50 model implementation specification, standard and model implementation specification, what he talked about, definitely unique. And the entire course, of your module A is predominantly depending on this framework, is obviously going to help you and me. And also the first 2 modules in detail, what he's talking about, from GDPR to CCPA to Singapore and HIPAA, even setting the context of multiple frameworks, how it is, expectations and requirements, and then talking about that Indian module specific, right, is really going to help you and me to look at from different contexts. So as he said correctly, please go through the things in detail, and please get in touch with us for further discussion so that you'll have more insight into what we are talking about. Thank you.
One more question which was there in between Rajiv Sioni. Is there any agreement or acceptance by the government on the concept of auditors? Now, yes, again, the data auditors, what is the system to be followed will again be a notification from the Data Protection Authority. Today, the law only says that data auditor will make an assessment of the compliance, and based on which we have developed this kind of a module. And as and when the DPA comes out with specific notifications, we will be making suitable modifications so that we will always be in tune with what is required. I expect that the DPA may come up with its own accreditation norms, which may include an examination, which may mean that people are prepared to take that examination. And then, see, I'm not expecting that the government will say that FDPPA certification is equivalent to acceptable or something like that. If it happens, it is fine, but we are not actually expecting that kind of a thing. They will have their own, say, some criteria, but people who have done our FTPPI program should find it much more easy than others to get through whatever else the TPA may set as the criteria for data auditors. Remember, data auditors are going to be mandatory statutory auditors. It's a big business, and with concurrent audit, there will all major companies will have to have running contracts with the data auditors. So all big fours will have to get into it, and every other persons who are in the data audit will have to get into that. And we are trying to do our best to meet see the expectations of what we expect DPA to do. I don't think it will be much different from what they can actually do. We are actually foreseeing what DPA can do. As I mentioned, as a shadow DPA, FDPPI is like a shadow DPA. We will try to foresee what is required. And of course, the legal authority is with DPA. And if they make some changes, we will adopt it. Okay.
Yeah, just to clarify, thank you for addressing this.
Yeah.
I said, are you in touch with any government agency or government officers also providing inputs from your side and taking feedback in advance of the formal notifications?
Generally, yes. Okay. I think beyond that, it's difficult to go into details. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Naavi sir, one more quick update. A few of the members had asked for the details of your contact points. I shared your mobile number too.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Any other
Deemed
question?
consent of yours.
Okay, done. In fact, it is there in the last slide itself, I think.
Correct.
Okay.
That is right. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Naavi, sir,
any other questions? Hamid?
last question from my side.
Yeah.
So as you already mentioned that DTS score is going to be mandatory going forward for the basically for significant data prodigy.
Yes.
So let's say if I get a low score, don't you think it will be I will be on the radar of government or a DPA from the penalty point of view?
No, actually, if you get a low score, you have to set in motion how to improve the score. So
Correct.
where you will immediately in your PBD, you will say you have been audited and this is score we have got, but we are taking steps to do it, to improve upon it. I think the regulator also knows that everybody is not 100% compliant with everything always, no. So if you have if I shown the inclination to improve, I think penalties will be reduced because of that. Otherwise, they are supposed to actually look at the entire universe, take complaints. Public may send some complaints to them saying this company is not doing data protection properly. Your competitors may send some anonymous emails. So they may have multiple ways by which they have to keep certain companies under radar. It will not be only through this. At least with this, you are going to tell them that I am one of the persons who is trying to understand where I am and trying to improve. I am sure that you will make your efforts to improve. Okay, in fact, in our DTS system, today we are starting at 0 date, but subsequently our DTS system will have something to indicate the trend of DTS. In fact, it will not be DTS 65 or something like that. We will say 65 plus plus or 65 plus minus. This plus or minus may indicate the last 2 years what was the DTS, whether it is an improving trend. If you say 65 plus plus, it means that today it is 65. Last year it might have been less than 65. Previous year also it was less than 65. So 3 years there is a continuous improvement. If I said 65 minus minus or something like that, I may say that for last 2 years you are declining. So this is the model which you have built. And of course, it is too early to talk about this because we don't have the first year DTS now. But when you come to second and third year, we will add the trend also into it.
So one more thing to that. So let's say I am a company and I have that DTS tool in place and I have an external auditor. As you said that going forward, I have to also finalize the statutory auditors going forward. So do I need to train my auditor on this DTS tool, how to use this?
External auditor is approved and accredited to the DPA.
Okay.
So you cannot train him. He has to get himself trained, okay. But you can internally, your DPOs and internal audit system, you can gear it up so that the external auditor will automatically learn from you. If you are a better person, any intelligent auditor will not
Okay.
expose his ignorance. He will try to learn from you, is it not?
True, true, true.
Yeah,
Thank you, Naavi sir.
thank you. Any other question? Otherwise, we will wind up.
Yes, sir. I think there are no questions available in the chat. And any other question, team? Anybody to Mr. Navi
Sorry,
on
line got
any other?
disconnected. I would like to ask one thing. Can we get the recorded version of this webinar so that we can go through again and again and to understand few things we might have missed? Is it possible to share the recording?
Yeah, we will try to provide. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much.
And any other persons who want to take certification examination and other services, definitely you can contact us. FDPPI is a not-for-profit organization. We are only blamed for underselling our services, so you will get whatever discounts are
Yeah,
given.
yeah.
In fact, I have been, even this 2,500 people are saying that I have made it too low, but FDPPI has the discretion tomorrow to direct me to increase it. So that's why I have said it is a limited period offer. Okay.
One last question. How do you register as an auditor, data protection auditor?
At present, we are providing the skill sets so that you go through the module I, G and A, and then passing the examination, you will be getting the certificate from FDPPI. But as far as the Data Protection Authority is concerned, when it comes, they will give certain norms, and based on which you may have to directly register yourself with the Data Protection Authority. That system we will not know until they come up with the notification. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay. You can always send me email for any more clarifications. I am quite open, and my site naavi.org contains my mobile number also. So we are open. FDPPA also has got all the contact details. Please do contact us, and also tell your friends and your companies. We are inviting corporate membership to FDPPI so that corporate members can join hands with us to develop sectoral, say, codes of practice. And when the DPA comes in, we want to actually present to the Data Protection Authority at least 5-6 sectoral things, and then say that, sir, please consider this as an acceptable code of practice. DPCSI will be an umbrella kind of a thing within which, as I told you, this model implementation specification, adopted specifications may be slightly different. That is where we will be accommodating the sectoral codes of practice. So I invite corporate members. We are all, say, our membership of DPPI is lifetime membership. Today we are talking of corporate membership is 18,000 lifetime. It is a pittance for many companies for the benefits which we are giving, but we have kept it like that because we want to be the organization of the data protection professionals. We are not driven by any company or something like that. The only patron for this is Ujjwala Consultants, my company, which is the smallest of the small companies. But it is actually built by the data protection professionals themselves. So corporate members will try to help us tomorrow to develop these codes of practice. We have got supporting members who execute projects on behalf of our FDPPI, and thereby they also benefit, we also benefit. So we have some very unique systems of membership also. Please go to FDPPI website and find out more about it. Okay.
Navi sir, I have already shared in the link both the FDPPI website address and navi.org address, and also your YouTube channel, Vijay Shankar Navi.
Okay.
And the team would request you to please go through it, and just wanted to inform you that every week religiously we have a session on Wednesday, what we call Jnanavardhini session. Be with me. You will please try to join. You will appreciate we keep getting, these industry stalwarts as part of this session, not only on privacy, any areas related to privacy like information security, SOC related stuff, HIPAA related, GDPR, so many things, right? And so many intellectuals are being brought there, and it's a voluntary session. We keep encouraging everybody to come and even present, not only the participation. Please make use of it. Would like to see each one of you on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Yeah. Thank you very much, Navi sir. Can we close it?
Yeah.
I really would like to really appreciate you and the kind of effort what you have again. No need to, as I said in my inaugural session, right? Kind of a pioneer you are. A great session, and thank you very much, Navi sir, for your efforts and knowledge share.
Thank
All
you.
have a nice weekend ahead, and would like to see you guys back on Wednesday. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Much.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.